Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Today, we're ripping into a colossal document, significant excerpts from a massive bill Congress has been looking at.
Yeah, it's kind of like a legislative everything bagel, isn't it?
Totally. It touches on, well, everything. Taxes, your health, immigration, energy, how the government itself runs, even transportation.
It really is remarkable how much ground is covered. Just, looking through this, you get a sense of how many different policy areas get bundled together when major legislation is put forward. I mean,
Yeah.
the level of detail is, well, it's immense.
Exactly. And our mission today, just for you listening, is to cut through all that density. We're not going to read the whole thing,
It's
obviously.
definitely not.
But we are going to pull out the most important nuggets, the surprising details, and give you a real feel for what's actually in these pages. Without getting lost in the jargon. We'll unpack this together.
Sounds like a plan, a crucial task, really.
Yeah.
So where do we start the excavation?
Let's start where most people probably feel the immediate impact, right in the wallet. This bill has a section specifically labeled Additional Tax Relief for American Families and Workers.
Ah, yes.
And some of the items in here sound like, well, direct benefits hitting pretty close to home.
That's right. For instance, I saw provisions specifying no tax on tips.
No tax on tips.
And another one says no tax on overtime.
Right. So for anyone in, say, the service industry or working extra hours, that's potentially more take-home pay right off the bat. Simple as that, maybe.
Seems like it, yeah. Without complex calculations. And there's more in that section, too.
Like what else?
It includes things like an enhanced deduction for seniors. And it clarifies no tax on car loan interest.
Okay, so targeted relief for specific groups there. Seniors, people with car loans.
Exactly. Seems designed for immediate financial relief.
And it extends to family and work support, too, doesn't it? I saw something about an enhancement of employer-provided childcare credit.
Yes, that's in there. And also an extension and enhancement of paid family and medical leave.
Right, so kind of encouraging businesses to support childcare and boosting policies for time off.
And then moving into how people save. The bill modifies rules around retirement savings contributions.
Okay.
It touches on things like qualified retirement savings contributions and specifically notes changes to catch-up contributions.
Catch-up contributions for older workers.
That's right, including an increase in the limit for those aged 50 and over.
Okay, standard kind of retirement tweak. But here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit unexpected.
Go on.
The bill introduces something called the MAGIA Accounts Contribution Pilot Program. The source material mentions a $5,000 contribution limit and an age 31 termination rule.
Right.
What are these based on what we're seeing here?
Well, based strictly on the text provided, they look like a new type of savings account. The key details we have are that $5,000 annual contribution cap.
Yeah.
And the fact that the account terminates when the individual hits 31.
Terminates. That's unusual.
Very. But calling it a pilot program, suggests it's maybe experimental or limited. The text doesn't explicitly state the purpose, but tying it to that early age limit suggests it might be aimed at encouraging savings among younger adults.
But it ends at 31, not like a long-term retirement account then.
No, that termination aspect is quite different. It's a unique structure outlined here, definitely.
Huh. Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears a bit from personal finances to how businesses and investments are taxed. What's changing there?
Well, the bill modifies how businesses can deduct interest. It extends certain deductions related to foreign income, things like FDII and GILTI, and it extends the base erosion minimum tax, the BEAT.
Okay, stop there. For listeners who aren't tax accountants, what do these kinds of changes usually signal? Big picture.
These are typically pretty complex provisions. They mainly impact larger businesses, especially those with international operations. The goal is often to fine-tune how corporate profits are taxed, maybe discourage moving profits overseas, or adjust how investments are structured for tax purposes.
So technical stuff, but potentially big impacts on corporate behavior.
Exactly. And government revenue, of course.
Got it. Now, there's a whole other section focused on additional tax relief for rural America and Main Street. What does that look like?
Well, one part offers a special depreciation allowance for certain qualified property used in production.
Okay, so letting businesses write off equipment faster.
Essentially, yes. Businesses in those areas. It helps them invest.
And it also renews and enhances opportunity zones, right, with specific provisions for rural areas.
That's right. Plus, there are new reporting requirements for the funds that invest in these zones, both the regular ones and the new qualified rural opportunity funds.
So trying to steer investment into specific geographic areas makes sense.
Exactly. And connecting back to that rural focus, there's also mention of rural emergency hospitals. Some provisions for a payment increase to certain facilities there.
Oh, okay. The bill also seems to include some limitations, though.
Yes, it does, like restricting certain tax benefits for entities that are deemed foreign influenced.
And something that affects a lot of homeowners, especially in certain states. It places new limitations on the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction.
That's a significant one for many individuals. What's clear from this whole tax section, really, is how the bill uses the tax code as a lever.
A lever for what?
Well, for various economic goals, encouraging individual spending or saving, incentivizing business investment in specific areas, making technical adjustments for large corporations, but also imposing some restrictions and caps.
Right, it's doing a lot of different things at once. Okay, that gives us a solid picture of the financial impacts. Now let's take that deep dive into health. Big changes proposed for Medicaid, it seems.
Yes, definitely. There are several provisions aimed at, let's say, tightening program integrity.
Like what?
For instance, increased screening requirements for healthcare providers who want to participate in Medicaid.
Okay, vetting providers more closely. What about eligibility for people?
Key changes there, too. It increases the frequency of eligibility redeterminations.
So checking more often if people still qualify.
Exactly. States will check more often. It also revises the limit on how much home equity someone can have and still be eligible for long-term care services under Medicaid.
Ah, okay. That home equity rule can be a big deal for seniors needing care.
It really can. And then there's a complex technical provision aimed at preventing individuals from being enrolled in Medicaid plans in multiple states, plus setting up address verification requirements.
Like a national check.
Seems like it. The bill gives states until October 2029 to get this system fully implemented, so it's a longer-term project.
Gotcha. It also modifies rules around retroactive coverage under Medicaid and CHIP.
Yes, the Children's Health Insurance Program. And there are specific requirements focused on making sure payments to pharmacies are accurate, and new rules for contracts with the managed care entities, the MCOs, that handle care for many Medicaid patients.
Okay, lots of administrative and payment adjustment.
Right. Now, this part of the bill also contains provisions that are, well, likely to be highly debated.
Okay.
The text explicitly states a prohibition on using federal financial participation under Medicaid. That's essentially the federal matching funds for certain procedures.
For the procedures.
It then goes on to list specific excluded categories. This includes certain gender-affirming care and related cosmetic procedures. The list is quite detailed in the bill text.
Okay. And it's important we note here, as we're looking at the source material, we're simply reporting what the bill says, stating the content, not taking a position.
Precisely. We're conveying what's written in the source. Another significant change outlined here is the introduction of community engagement requirements for Medicaid eligibility.
Community engagement. Is that like work required?
That's essentially what they are,
Okay.
yes, work
Okay.
requirements. The bill details the exceptions that would be allowed and rules for notifying people.
And it prevents waivers.
It explicitly prohibits states from waiving these requirements under certain broad demonstration authorities they currently have, like Section 1115 waivers.
So adding conditions to eligibility for many people. But there are also limits on costs.
Yes, limits on how much certain individuals can be charged out of pocket, capping charges at $35, with specific rules mentioned for prescription drugs.
Okay, so a lot happening within Medicaid itself. What about private health insurance?
The bill touches on that too. It includes changes affecting health reimbursement arrangements, HRAs, and how they can be integrated with individual market coverage options, like those on the ACA exchanges.
Integrating HRAs. Okay. And there's a new tax credit.
Yes, a new choice arrangement tax credit. It's for employers who offer certain kinds of coverage, starting at $100 per employee per month in the first year.
Trying to encourage more employers to offer coverage, perhaps?
Could be the goal, yes. There are also provisions related to health savings accounts, HSAs.
What kind of provisions?
Things like allowing fees for direct primary care service arrangements to be treated as qualified medical expenses, and potentially allowing costs related to physical activity to qualify as medical expenses too.
Interesting. Treating gym memberships like medical expenses. Potentially.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
The text mentions physical activity costs.
And what about the ACA exchanges themselves, the Affordable Care Act marketplaces?
Modifications there too. It prohibits certain types of special enrollment periods, based on income changes,
Okay.
and it addresses rules to ensure insurance companies still have to issue coverage. You know, the guaranteed issue part,
Mm.
even if someone previously didn't pay their premiums.
The non-payment issue. That's been a sticking point.
Mm-hmm. And another specific change, prohibiting people from being automatically re-enrolled from a bronze level plan to a silver level plan on the exchanges.
Okay, no automatic upgrades. What about drug pricing? Always a hot topic.
Well, the bill expands an exclusion for orphan drugs. Those are drugs for rare diseases under the government's drug price negotiation program.
So fewer drugs for rare diseases subject to negotiation.
That seems to be the effect, yes. And it adds mandates for pharmacy benefit managers, PBMs,
PBMs. The middlemen. What mandates?
regarding fee disclosure and reporting. They'd have to report more transparently to the insurance plans and to the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Trying to get more transparency in that complex system.
Seems to be the aim. Plus, there's funding allocated for the HHS Inspector General and the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, to study drug price-related compensation across the entire supply chain.
From manufacturer to pharmacist.
Exactly, following the money, essentially.
Wow. So this health section is just incredibly broad then. It's tightening Medicaid eligibility, adding work requirements, nudging employer insurance, tweaking ACA rules, and trying to tackle drug pricing transparency.
It really touches on just about every way someone might access or pay for health care in the U.S. It shows the deep interconnectedness of public and private systems.
And the government's role in regulating both. Okay, let's shift focus dramatically now. Let's talk about the border and immigration. This falls under the Judiciary Committee's section in the bill.
Right. And this part introduces a whole suite of new and modified fees related to immigration processes.
Fees for what exactly?
We see specific fees mentioned for asylum applications, for employment authorization documents, work permits, and for parole applications. There's even a fee associated with the termination, renewal, or extension of work permits for asylum applicants specifically.
And a new one, too.
Yes, a new Diversity Immigrant Visa Program registration fee. It sets a minimum of $250 for the next fiscal year, with adjustments after that.
$250 just to register for the diversity lottery.
And what's notable here, according to the text, is that this specific fee cannot be waived or reduced. No exceptions mentioned.
Okay. Beyond fees, what about border security measures?
The bill mandates specific measures there. It directs resources towards U.S. Customs and Border Protection Technology, the National Vetting Center, and other efforts, all aimed at enhancing security at the border.
Technology and vetting. And what about unaccompanied children? UACs.
There are detailed provisions concerning them. This includes requirements for both DHS, Homeland Security, and HHS, Health and Human Services, to conduct criminal and gang checks on these children.
Checks on the children themselves.
That's what the text indicates, yes. Criminal and gang checks. It also mandates gathering information about their sponsors and outlines procedures for the repatriation of unaccompanied alien children, sitting in the back.
Repatriation procedures. Okay. Is there funding for enforcement?
Yes, significant funding directed towards IC immigration and customs enforcement, specifically for enforcement and removal operations. The bill earmarks $700 million for the next fiscal year for this, and it notes that includes funding for IT investments to support these operations.
$700 million for ICE ERO, finally in this immigration section.
The bill includes provisions allowing for the removal of certain criminal aliens without further hearing, streamlining removal for some.
And it addresses inadmissibility rules who can be blocked from entering for individuals associated with certain criminal or security risks.
So yeah, this section focuses heavily on funding, fees, technology, and processes, border management, vetting, enforcement, and specific rules for populations like unaccompanied kids and those with criminal records.
A lot of focus on process and enforcement there. Okay, from immigration, let's transition to the physical ground itself, energy, environment, and land management.
Right. This part of the bill modifies rules for both onshore and offshore oil and gas leasing on federal lands.
How so?
It sets new minimum acreage requirements for lease sales. For instance, requiring not less than 1 million acres to be offered in offshore sales.
1 million acres minimum offshore.
Wow. And it also specifies the frequency of these sales, how often they might happen. And it changes the royalty rates the government collects.
Royalty rates are changing.
Yes. For example, onshore rates are now specified as being between 12.5% and 18.75%. A range is given.
Okay. Any specific areas mentioned?
Yes. There are unique provisions for the Naval Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, NPRA.
What about NPRA?
The bill requires lease sales there at least every 2 years, offering substantial acreage each time. And significantly, it deems that previous environmental studies for the area fulfill the requirements for subsequent sales.
Wait, say that again? Previous environmental studies count for future sales.
That's what the text says.
Mm-hmm.
It could potentially speed up the leasing process there quite a bit by bypassing some environmental review steps.
Wow, that seems potentially controversial. Also, the bill introduces a new fee.
Yes, a fee for anyone who wants to file a protest against a Bureau of Land Management, a BLM, oil and gas lease sale.
How much?
It's a $150 base fee plus $5 per page if your protest document is over 10 pages long.
So a fee to protest a lease sale. Okay.
Yeah.
What about big infrastructure?
The bill addresses cross-border energy infrastructure, think pipelines, transmission lines. It details permitting processes, and notably includes an option for expedited review of these permits. But it comes with a hefty price tag,
How hefty?
an associated fee of $10 million.
$10 million just for a faster review.
$10 million, yes. It really highlights the scale and, I guess, the potential value tied up in these massive energy projects.
No kidding. What else is in this energy and environment section?
There's also something called a de-risking compensation program. It's outlined for certain energy projects that experience financial losses because of specific federal actions. It involves enrollment fees and premiums.
De-risking federal actions. Interesting concept. What about renewables?
Renewable energy projects on federal lands aren't exempt from fees either. There are new renewable energy fees on federal lands. Specifically, acreage rent for wind and solar rights of way.
So rent for wind and solar farms on public land.
Right. And interestingly, the bill includes some very specific, localized prohibitions,
Prohibitions on what?
preventing the implementation of certain existing resource management plans. It actually names the Miles City Field Office Plan in Montana and a plan in North Dakota.
So Congress stepping in to block specific local land management plans.
That's what it looks like, yes. And finally, it authorizes specific land sales, like in Washoe County and Lincoln County, Nevada. It outlines processes for selecting parcels and even mentions considering affordable housing in those sales.
Okay, so this section really covers the nuts and bolts of how the government manages energy extraction on public lands. Setting fees, rules, even dictating specific land use in certain spots, alongside provisions for big infrastructure and renewables.
Exactly. It shows the really detailed federal role in managing our resources and land use. It's quite granular.
Okay, now let's look at the people who actually work for the federal government and how government agencies themselves are run.
Right. This begins with some pretty significant changes to the Federal Employees Retirement System, or FERS.
FERS, what's changing?
The bill mandates an increase in the contribution rates that federal employees themselves pay towards their own retirement. There's a table showing different percentages based on when someone was hired.
So employees pay more into their retirement. What else?
It also changes how the average pay used to calculate your FERS pension is determined. Currently, it's based on your highest 3 consecutive years of pay.
Right, the high 3.
This bill changes it to any 5 consecutive years of creditable service.
Any 5 consecutive years, not necessarily the highest 5?
Doesn't say highest, just any 5 consecutive years.
What's the practical effect of that change for most federal workers?
Well, for most people, using an average of any 5 consecutive years rather than their absolute highest 3 is likely to result in a slightly lower average pay figure being used in the pension calculation.
So potentially smaller pensions down the line.
It could lead to marginally smaller defined benefit pension payouts upon retirement. For many, yes. It's a subtle but potentially significant shift.
That is a significant detail for federal retirees, current and future. But the bill also introduces a whole new option, right? Something potentially transformative.
Yes, it does. It gives current federal employees the option to elect at-will employment.
At-will employment for federal workers. That sounds different.
It is. If they choose this, their FERS contribution requirement is reduced, so they pay less into retirement.
Okay, saving on retirement contributions sounds appealing. But what's the catch? What does at-will employment mean in this context for a federal job?
Well, the text clarifies that if an employee elects this, their rights to appeal adverse personnel actions like getting fired are significantly curtailed.
How curtail?
The bill states appeals are repealed for actions taken for good cause, bad cause, or no cause at all.
Wow. Good cause, bad cause, or no cause.
That fundamentally changes the job security aspect, doesn't it?
It really does. That security is traditionally a major feature of federal employment. However, it does specify that certain rights, like whistleblower protections, are preserved.
So you keep whistleblower rights, but lose appeal rights for being fired for potentially no reason. That's a huge trade-off.
It's a major trade-off option presented in the bill, yes. Very significant potential change to the nature of federal service.
Wow. Okay. Shifting from the employees themselves to federal agencies, particularly financial regulators, what's changing there?
It transfers certain fees and duties of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, the PCAOB,
The audit watchdog.
right, over to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, except for Section 107 duties it specifies. Okay, shifting some oversight responsibilities, what about the CFPB?
It modifies how the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's civil penalty fund is handled. Excess amounts in that fund, after compensating direct victims of wrongdoing, would go to the Treasury's general fund instead of staying within the CFPB for other uses like consumer education.
So money collected from fines goes back to the general Treasury pot.
If it's beyond what's needed for direct victim compensation, yes. It also limits assessments for something called the Financial Research Fund.
Okay. And moving into, well, the future of technology, there's something about AI.
Yes, the bill includes language limiting the government's ability to impose certain regulations on artificial intelligence models and systems.
Limiting AI regulation. How so?
It seems to prevent agencies from imposing substantive requirements unless those requirements are either federally mandated by Congress or are generally applicable rules applied uniformly across industries, not just specific to AI.
Trying to set some boundaries on how agencies can regulate AI development and use.
Seems to be the intent, yes. So this broad section impacts the working conditions and retirement of the huge federal workforce, adjusts the power and funding of key financial watchdogs, and even attempts to set parameters for regulating rapidly evolving AI tech.
It really covers both the human capital side and the operational and technological aspects of government itself.
Definitely.
Okay, finally, let's look at transportation and infrastructure. This section includes some significant funding allocations.
Yes, it provides substantial funding for Coast Guard assets necessary to secure the maritime border and interdict migrants and drugs.
How much funding?
Allocating $2.5 billion specifically for acquiring and sustaining these assets, ships, aircraft, etc.
$2.5 billion for Coast Guard border security assets. And there's a weirdly specific instruction in there.
There is. It includes a specific limitation. If the Coast Guard needs a floating dry dock with this funding, they can't buy it directly. They have to acquire it through a third-party contract.
A very specific legislative detail right there.
Okay.
What else for transportation?
The bill also allocates $1.5 billion for the Port Infrastructure Development Program. That's aimed at improving ports across the country.
Ports need upgrades. That makes sense.
And it adjusts the harbor maintenance tax rates. Those are the fees paid on imported and exported cargo moving through ports.
Okay, adjusting existing fees. But there's a new fee too, right? One that could affect a lot of us.
Yes. The bill introduces a new registration fee on motor vehicles, an annual fee.
An annual fee on cars. How much?
It's based on the vehicle type. $25 per year for passenger vehicles and light trucks, and $50 per year for commercial vehicles.
A new $25 or $50 annual federal fee just to own a vehicle.
That's what the text proposes.
Right.
And the bill even includes grants to states to help them set up the systems to collect this fee.
Wow, a new nationwide fee on vehicle ownership. Okay, what else?
The bill also requires the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, that's the agency overseeing trucking, to maintain a public website showing the operating status of motor carriers, if their authority is active. And it imposes an annual $100 usage fee for accessing the site.
A fee to check if a trucking company is legally operating.
Seems so. An annual $100 fee for users of that specific FMCSA website data.
Okay. And finally, big investments in aviation.
Yes, major investments in the Federal Aviation Administration's infrastructure replacement. Billions allocated.
For what specifically?
Things like air traffic control towers, radar systems, and particularly a large amount, $4.75 billion, for the telecommunications infrastructure that supports air traffic control.
Okay, upgrading the backbone of the air travel system. So this section is directing big money towards maritime border security, port improvements, introducing new fees on vehicles and trucking data access, and making major investments in FAA infrastructure.
Pretty much. It touches on how goods move, how people move, and crucially, how the systems supporting all that movement are funded and maintained.
Right. And, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground across those major themes, but there are other notable provisions scattered throughout the bill, too, right? In various committee sections.
Absolutely. We didn't dive deep into every single corner, but for example, in agriculture,
Yeah.
we saw the repeal of something called the National Education and Obesity Prevention Grant Program and changes related to alien SNAP eligibility, so affecting food assistance access for certain non-citizens.
Okay.
There's even funding allocated for something called the Sheep Production and Marketing Grant Program. Very specific.
Sheep marketing. Okay. And defense.
The defense budget sections are vast, of course, but they include specific line items for things like shipbuilding.
Yeah.
Billions mentioned for San Antonio-class amphibious transport dock ships and America-class amphibious assault ships.
Big Navy procurements.
And funding aimed at enhancing missile defense production capacity, things like that.
Got it. What's truly striking, though, having gone through these various sections, is just the sheer scope, the breadth of what a single piece of legislation like this can contain.
It really is. We've pulled out key details impacting individual taxes, healthcare access, immigration processes, how energy is leased on public land, the actual employment terms for federal workers, new fees related to transportation.
All within one bill. It's incredible.
It vividly illustrates how diverse and granular policy decisions are made at the federal level, and how these seemingly unrelated areas are frequently bundled together in the legislative process, for better or worse.
Absolutely. So we took this deep dive into these excerpts from this bill, trying to extract the critical details and implications directly from the source material, just for you listening.
And hopefully that gives you a clearer picture of the incredible range of issues being addressed and the specific changes being proposed within this document.
So, reflecting on all of this document, spanning so many facets of life, from your personal finances and health to border security and energy policy, what does it make you consider about the process? About how such massive, complex legislation gets put together?
Right. And how changes in one specific area, maybe a new fee on federal land leases or a shift in who qualifies for Medicaid, how might that be connected, or perhaps totally unrelated, to seemingly separate areas like, say, tax breaks for families or funding for military assets?
Yeah.
It really encourages us to think about that interconnected web of public policy, doesn't it? Or maybe the sometimes disconnected strands.
Definitely something to think about. We hope this deep dive helped you navigate some of the key aspects buried within this lengthy document. Maybe take a moment to think about the specific details that stood out to you the most, and how these potential changes might affect your life, your community, or areas you care about.
Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.